Good morning, everybody. Ravi Nayub here from the Localization Fireside Chat, and welcome to another episode. With this episode, I think we're recording 255 today, and I really appreciate you joining me on the journey of this recording. We've attempted this recording before, just to be completely honest with the audience, but it didn't work. Unfortunately, we ran into some technical issue, and we had to repeat it again. My guest of honor today is Ilya Spiridonov, and Ilya joined me. I think you're in Lithuania, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, Robin. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Ilya, for joining me again. I really appreciate it. And again, sorry for bringing you one more time for this conversation. We had such an interesting conversation last time. We thought, hey, why don't we do it again, right? Is that how it
Absolutely.
works?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's hope the second time is the charm.
Second time is a charm. Ilya Spiridonov, for the audience, he's a chief commercial officer for Alconost. Alconost is a translation company or a localization company specializing in software, games, and helping global brands find their voice in their local market. Ilya has spent time there helping clients figure out and not just how to translate, but how to prioritize markets. When you're busy doing your thing as a product developer or as a commercial company, probably the last thing on your mind is how to translate and who to translate. You're just focusing on building your product and your services. This is where somebody like Ilya and the rest of the professionals in the localization industry comes in to help you figure this out. Where to translate, how to translate, and to whom to translate, and how to perhaps make the market accepting of your product or services that you're trying to sell to that particular market. The idea here is that Ilya is not just running a sales department. He's in charge of the entire revenue stream for Alconost. So the chief commercial relationship officer or commercial officer of a company is in charge of the entire revenue picture, if you will, for a particular company. We'll get into that in a second here. First, Ilya, welcome again to the Localization Fireside Chat. Good to see you again. And hopefully it's not too late for you. It's 11 o'clock for me here. So
it's the perfect time, the sunset time. Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure. Thank you, Robin. The Fireside Chat sounds really cozy, so I'm always happy to join.
And I can't believe I'm saying this. And it's July 22nd. I am in Toronto, Canada, and it's 14 degrees Celsius outside this morning. So I really need to be by the fireplace in July. I can't believe I'm saying that. Meanwhile, probably the rest of the world is too hot for them or something.
Yeah, especially with the heat waves in Europe. Yeah.
Before we get into Alconost commercial operation, I want to go back, if you don't mind. What was your mental model of sales when you first came into the industry, and how does that compare to being a CCO right now actually look like today?
Well, it's an interesting, very good question. The mental model of sales was very biased and focused on outbound sales at the time. So we were doing quite a lot of outreach, and the CEO's perspective and my own perspective was that that's the main thing that's supposed to happen in sales at a localization company. However, I think you have the sales background, right? You know something that is called timing. When you consider budget, authority, need, and timing. Timing is in localization, I think, is the most challenging part because everybody probably needs it. The question is when, right? So the time frames or the sales cycle in outbound specifically in localization are just, it's just a bloodbath, to be honest. And with everything that's happening right now in the industry in sales, right, with AI, with automation, with a lot of AI-based personalization and so on, some channels like email are no longer working the way they used to work, right? So it's still a bloodbath. I haven't cracked outbound sales during these 12 years I've been doing this yet. It's still challenging. Sometimes I'm it lets me down, but still challenging, right? However, of course, as you evolve into, you become a manager, your mindset shifts to a picture where you're no longer the lone wolf, right? You have a team that you need to make successful. So at this stage, it's mostly about making people successful, setting up for success, right? Rather than just closing deals. So yeah, the transformation has happened in the mindset, obviously.
And for those who don't know you, Ilya, if you don't mind, just give us a bit of a background story on you. What is your story? As people, like, the first time they're going to be listening to this episode, at least they can connect the dots here. So
I come from finance, from banking, to be honest. And when some changes happened in my life, I was looking for a job, and I was introduced to our current CEO, Alex, who's my friend. And at that time, I thought, all right, localization, translation agency. I'm all right. I'm going to try this, then I'm going to find a real job, right? So here I am, 12 years later. Still finding a real job, but to be honest, of course, I found it, right? And I've come to love the industry. I've come to love sales, which is, to be honest, it's coming from a person who doesn't like to talk to new people, who's not really open, So I'm very, closed off and reserved. But still, sales just changed.
do you enjoy selling?
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy the process, I think, even more than the outcome.
Now, you mentioned something at the front end of this, is that the outbound sales is still a challenge, and it's always been a challenge and will always be a challenge. What are you doing in the process to fix that? Or is there a remedy on your side that you're implementing?
I think, again, it's sort of a mindset, a philosophy. What we're trying to do is not rushing into whatever everybody else is doing, right? So when, outbound sales has always been challenged by tools, right? 5-10 years ago, you would have tools that automated quite a lot in sales outreach, right? A lot of people started using it. The people on the receiving end started to go kind of blind to that volume of outreach, right? This is something that is happening again. A lot of people are using automation tool, AI tools, and people on the receiving end, they're just going blind again, to even with personalized outreach, right? Then a lot is happening in the infrastructure, deliverability, inbox placement, and so on, right? So what we are doing is we try to keep or to preserve the human aspect, the human-based personalization, the relationship aspect, right? The quality versus volume balance, and instead of spamming, people try to really deliver value through content, right? So I call this content-led outbound. You create a lot of personalized content that's relevant to the recipient. You share it in a way that's relevant to them. So that's my.
No, if I've interviewed just after we talked the first time, the CEO of a company called Lucia out of Tel Aviv, and he's under the belief that 80% of the outbound sales will be automated, and 20% of it will remain a human touch. And when I asked him and I pressed him on the topic, the human part would be the conversation part will not be replaced, but everything else in between will be completely replaced in the next year or two. Now, you mentioned earlier, like, the outbound is still a challenge. It's a challenge for everybody, not just for the localization industry. Everybody is a challenge for it. Like, to get a meeting with somebody right now is like pulling teeth, to be honest with you. It's not easy. You get the ignore button all the time. And not because your pitch is illegitimate or doesn't sit well or was not phrased correctly, but the sheer amount of content being generated and thrown out there. People are becoming numb to that, and it goes into spam, whatever you want to call it. Like, they're just not answering it anymore. So the good guys with the bad guys are getting mixed all together in terms of their messaging, and people are just turning it off.
True. And I think it's also backed by research that the buyer behavior is changing. So most buyers no longer want a sales rep to be involved, at least at the discovery stage, right? They want to find out for themselves, and then maybe at a later stage they want to, put this at the next level, right? But at the early stage, early on in the sales cycle, they rather prefer not to be disturbed. They rather prefer to explore on their own, to kind of learn about the product or service from different sources. And this is where we've been talking about outbound a lot. But what I also wanted to note is that inbound is, at least for me personally, for the company, is becoming strategically much more important. And there's quite a lot to do there, right? Quite a lot to teach your team how you hold a discovery meeting, how you qualify leads, how you even how you follow up, how you prepare a digital sales room for your lead or prospect, and so on and so on, right? So that's also challenging, still challenging 20 years, 12 years later.
And to be honest with you, for the audience out there, when you're focusing on your inbound, you can engineer that a little bit. So you can create a content that you wanted to create that draw the inbound in, and you can modify your content in a way that gets you to the end results that you like. Your inbound customers, the one you want, because then you're framing your content in that fashion, right? So it is, as opposed to the outbound, when you're going out and you're asking for the business is really seeking you now. After, as Ilya was mentioning, most customers like to do their homework before they pick up the phone and call somebody, or not necessarily call people now, but they send them a little message, say, I'm interested in what you have to offer. But they do their homework first.
Exactly. This is where marketing starts to play a very important strategic role. Of course, it has always been like that. But right now, I think, and what I'm seeing right now at Alconost is that marketing and sales are, to a certain extent, merging into some marketing, if you wish.
Mhm.
So running, mutual or joint campaigns like ABM, account-based marketing is becoming more strategically important and so on. So these are the trends I'm following, as both internally at Alconost and externally. So yeah, exciting times.
You're right. I'm seeing a lot more conversation that are joint conversation between sales and marketing, which I've never seen before. I mean, I saw them before, but they were rare. But now you see them like sitting at the same table, having the same language. Marketing is a lot more involved in lead gen now. Than they were before, and they're accountable for it. So there is if I'm going to spend $1 on marketing, I'm expecting leads to come out of that, not just necessarily, post ads on certain platforms and, hope for the best kind of thing. So they're a lot more involved now in lead generation and accountable for it.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're seeing on your side, Ilya?
Yes, and to a certain extent, because sales is closer to the real client, if you wish, right? So we're having the actual conversations. We, on a daily basis, learn about the points, what they're looking for. The role of the sales team is to actually communicate that knowledge to the marketing. This is where this connection is becoming even more important. So yeah, exciting.
In marketing becoming more targeted, right, Ilya? Right, targeted.
Absolutely.
Like account-based marketing now. I'm hearing a lot more about that.
ABM,
where you select a few individuals that you want to market to, and you create content for those specific individuals.
Absolutely. To target, as long as this audience is reachable, you can target it and you have a value proposition for them. Yeah, it's a good place to start thinking about account-based marketing. But it's very expensive, to be honest.
For those, Ilya, for those who are not familiar with Alconost, would you mind give us the 100,000-foot level Alconost brief?
I really like how you put it early on. But basically, in a few words, we are a localization vendor offering translation localization services, which is shifting with what's happening with AI right now towards consultancy, and includes building the right workflows, consulting on integrating AI or AI-led translation pipelines, and pretty much leading the client from point A, where they say, I want this translated, to point B, where they say, I have released this in 20 languages. So yeah, that's where we are.
I like the consultancy frame. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun, again, from the sales perspective, not from a localization perspective, right? 5 years ago, our sales conversations were mostly about, all right, we are a translation services provider, we have native speaker linguists, here's how we can help you, right? And that, translations used to be, I think, mostly a commodity. Right now, this is changing in a way that translation, the translation layer itself is becoming a commodity, right? But there is much more to how you kick off the process, right? Like, what kind of LLM or kind of AI engine should you choose for your content? What kind of risk appetite do you have? What kind of post-editing effort you need? What kind of pipeline you need to build? What kind of languages you have? What models or AI engines work better for this language set, and so on and so on. Because there is much more knowledge in the industry on the part of somebody who is building the process, right? And if you don't have that knowledge or that know-how, like from the client's perspective, it's probably easier to externalize this function, right? To offset this to a vendor who has this knowledge, right? So we're not only translating right now because AI is doing most of the job today. We are building workflows, building automation workflows, building the QA layer, also with, of course, the human in the loop layer. So it's becoming more complicated. And from the sales guy perspective, the conversations are becoming much more interesting because there's usually this wow effect when you're talking to people who are not very familiar with how things look right
Now, I know through the research I did, I guess, you sort of specialize in gaming or the gaming industry. At least that's how it was, and you're shifting obviously from that. But why gaming, and why does it need to be different than others? And I've interviewed a few executives in the industry about gaming before, so I sort of have an idea. But for those out there who do not know, that gaming is a little different than the rest of the industries, and can you give us a little bit of a highlight on that?
Yeah, I think game dev in general. Well, first of all, it's very diverse, right? You have indie developers, you have AAA titles, you have mobile games, you have console games, and so on and so on, right? Second is, I believe that, well, when it comes to translations, right, in game dev, people are more concerned about the quality and the outcome than in, let's say, in marketing content, because marketing content today is very often throwaway, right? You publish it, it has its cycle, then it's kind of phases off, right? A game that you've been working on for, I don't know, 5 years, 3 years, 5 years, especially AAA title, you release it, and let's say it's very high risk trying to save some money in a big game dev project on translations, right? So nobody's doing like, all right, we've spent like tens of millions of dollars on this project. Now, you know what we're going to do now? We will save some money on translations. So in large projects, this doesn't happen. So what I've seen and what I'm seeing still is that game development teams are more, let's say, they're more likely to order the highest level of localization, which usually involves human translation, right? And they specifically want, their specific request is, we don't need AI, we want human translators, humans to be more creative, right? And we have linguists pretty much who play games, who are avid gamers who work with us, right? So this is the team that our vendor management built over the years, right? And then they say, all right, we also need the linguistic QA layer. We actually need somebody to play the game in the target language. This is something that you won't get with AI still in 2026, right? So this is, I think, what's different about game dev when it comes to localization.
And you're referring, when you talk about testing the translation in the target language, you're referring to something called game testers, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, we call it linguistic QA, linguistic quality assurance. Yeah,
Okay.
but it's sometimes people call it play test, sometimes it's linguistic testing.
Hey, Ilya, like, does operation or service delivery, I don't know what you call it in Alconost, but service delivery or operation, do they report to you or they report to somebody else?
No, they report to our COO. Yeah, but that's a good territory because, again, from a salesman perspective, we used to have this, handoff point where you convert the client, you do the kickoff meeting, and then it becomes the responsibility of the operations team, of the project manager.
That's how it always worked.
Yeah. But we found that you still need a layer of account management, and we started to build this function 2 years ago, actually, and it proved to be very, very good, right, for us. Where account management teams or a person is responsible for the success and for the further development of the client rather than the day-to-day business, right? So you don't have that at the operations side. Operations side, usually they are busy with delivering translations tomorrow or maybe even today in the evening, right? Account management, they're more about relationship building, trying to find new opportunities, trying to optimize things for the client, trying to keep the client happy, QBRs, and so on and so on. So that part of the client life cycle, the account management part of it, is under my control, under my supervision. The operations report to CEO.
Now, a lot of companies listening to this, they're saying, hey, my project managers do this, the whole account management piece. Yeah, they can. But the other question probably is they're asking themselves, they're saying, well, why should I invest in account management? Why did Alconost invest in account management, and what was the return on investment?
Well, to be honest, we still don't have the number return on investment. There's this notion of understanding that strategically it works, but I wouldn't be able to share any numbers with you or anyone with the board whatsoever, right? However, we did this at a strategic point happened when AI, again, AI, we're talking about AI today, of course, obviously. When AI started to be very relevant in the translation space, right? It happened for us like 2-3 years ago when we started to have these conversations with our existing clients who relied on human translations for years before that. We said it proactive. We said, hey, there's this new service level, which is AI with human in the loop. Would you like to kind of to start shifting towards this, right? And it's kind of counterintuitive because we would, you would think we were shooting ourselves in the leg, right? However, if you think of it strategically in the long term, you are creating value for the client, right? Of course, your revenue goes down because AI-based translation services are less expensive compared to human translation services. However, what we were betting on and what happened actually was that these companies, by saving, I don't know, 30-40% of their localization budget, they started thinking in terms of volumes and more content that can be translated. And the reason being, from my perspective, as I see strategically for them, was that localization is a competitive edge, competitive advantage. So the more you localize, the more languages you have, the stronger you're as a competitor to your, to the peers in the market. So we started to say that it almost any client that we've spoken with who started to switch, right? And up to this point, I do believe that, and it's proved by the numbers, right? That this was a important strategic move and a successful one for us.
And plus, I'm assuming, I mean, I've tested this theory many times in my career in the localization industry. When everybody is busy and you don't have time to communicate with the customer, that means somebody else is communicating with the customer. And generally, it's your competitors, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when we started this account management, we started to have very high quality conversation because unlike classic sales where you're trying to pitch something to somebody, right? This is a relationship that already exists, and they are much more open to new ideas, to actually speaking with you. And we started to have a lot of insights about what they actually need, what their risks are, what they're afraid of, what their goals are, and you can build on that, right? You can build a relationship on that. You obviously can build a business on that. You can grow on.
And I'm assuming, Ilya, you prevent account leakage, because in order for you to grow any business, you got to stop the accounts from running away. And the only way you can stop them from running away is by bringing them closer to you by introducing account management, for instance. Because a lot of companies out there, they say, "Hey, I want to grow my company." Well, then you look at the customer retention, and you look at your customer retention is like, I don't know, say 80%. That means 20% of your customers are leaving. So now, in order for you to grow, let's say 15%, you need 35% more every year. People forget that. They say, "Oh, I want to grow. Absolutely. I brought 10 customers." But if you have 20 customers that left you, well, that's not growth. That's basically substituting what lost.
Absolutely. And it's a very good point. And thanks for raising this, Aaron, because there's actually even deeper perspective. If you go deeper, right? So the client portfolio, it's not uniform, right? You have very small clients that are churning very fast, and you have very large clients. So if you look at the distribution, your mean would be somewhere in the mean, but your average will be kind of shifted towards left or right, which would mean that most of the revenue are probably generated by your largest accounts, right? Which means that strategically it's much more important to keep those, right? Because losing one strategic large account can pretty much kill your business. Two, that's it, right? Losing 10, 15 smaller accounts, well, it's manageable. So as long as you're diversified, right, of course it's much better. So, and the account management effort was actually aimed at the top level, or the top end of the client portfolio, and we did manage to improve quite significantly the retention.
Yeah, this which brings another point, because most companies, they focus on, let's say, the larger ones, right? So I'm talking like the top ones. Pick one, TransPerfect, Language, all these guys. I'm assuming the question. I mean, things have changed quite dramatically since I left, I guess. But what I always knew that we manage the 80-20 rules. The entire industry runs on 80-20 rules, right? So you spend 80% of your effort at the top 20 customers, or 20% of your customers, and then there is that tail accounts. If you list them on a spreadsheet, they probably look so many of them, but they don't give you a lot of revenue, and you wonder in your role, in your capacity, is there like a hidden gem? I always wondered that. Like, so I've got, say, 100 accounts that they're giving me a small amount of money, but is there a hidden gem somewhere that I can take one of those accounts and work with them and grow them to be a bigger account?
Absolutely.
Again, it's a chicken and the egg kind of scenario here, right? You spend
Absolutely.
an effort, you don't.
Yeah. And there's also the middle, right? So there's the smaller, the smallest account, that there's the largest, but somewhere in the middle, you're still getting some churn that nobody's working with. However, if you do some sort of recycling exercise, you try to talk to those accounts who have churned, you can still revive some of them, and that still has effects on retention, on revenue in the end of the day, right? So, and when you don't have the account management role, again, operation people will never do that. Salespeople, they're mostly focused on bringing new money, right? So nobody's actually working with churn, with retention, with cross sale, upsell, and so on. So account management is very strategic.
And the account managers, this is where you have, for the audience, some of the functions you would do in an account management is you would have a cadence developed with your customers, with the approval of your customers, and you follow this particular cadence. Example, for instance, you will have an onboarding sessions with them. You will have QBRs, that's quarterly business review sessions.
Yep.
You will have annually, monthly, semi-annually, depends on what the customer is willing to do with you here and how much conversation they're willing to take on with you. But you would have a specific cadence or, designed for a specific customer, and you would follow that cadence to build that trust with your customers. And typical things would be aiming at improving what you're currently delivering to the customer and increasing that satisfaction level. For instance, if you have a contract with your customer and that contract has a KPI indicated in the particular contract, you would need account management to manage to those KPIs, because if you slip up or down on those KPIs, what you end up happening is what we started the conversation with: customers unhappy, and at the first exit in the highway, they will dump you. It's not a secret. That's how it
Yeah.
works.
And to add to that, those KPIs, well, I'm not sure about your experience, but in our experience, those KPIs are never included in the contract, which doesn't mean you can't know about them. So as long as you start having this conversation, right, you sometimes find out that even though you don't have this in the contract, the client still thinks in terms of budget, in terms of cost per word overall across all of the languages, in terms of money saved due to translation memory matches, in terms of turnaround efficiency, in terms of quality, and so on and so on. However, some of these things are not included.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if they're not included in contract, even if they're not included in the contract and they are important to managing the relationship, you're still in your best interest as a business to have some sort of a discussions around that and articulate it back to the customer. Here's what we are delivering for you, Mr. Customer, and put them up front in the conversation. Now, in terms of organization, like from Alconost, you're based in the US. You are the company is based in the US. You are based in Lithuania. So the question, and I know you guys are not like mega company, but you're decent sized company. Are you structurally centralized or regionalized where the market is? How are you operating?
We're actually not centralized. We're quite flat. Well, the structure is quite flat, right? We don't specifically serve a particular region. We're quite global. However, we started to develop regional teams, especially in Asia, so Korea, Japan, and China, because of particular cultural reasons, because we wanted to have local people there, time zones and so on. But otherwise, when it comes to Europe, US, or the other parts of the world, we are not focusing on a particular region.
Now, from a let's say a customer comes to you and we're going to talk AI for a second here, and the customer says, "Hey, I want to use AI to cut cost of localization down." So help me or help the audience. What is the conversation look like from your perspective on that angle?
First of all, the way you framed it, it used to happen in the way they framed it in this way, like say, I don't know, 1 year ago maybe. Right now, what they do is they say, all right, we have translated this using AI and we just need to review, right? And then, again, why it's getting interesting for the salesperson, because they can deliver value. They start asking questions first, saying, what kind of engine did you use, right? They say, all right, OpenAI. Why? And they say, I don't know, because we just had a subscription. But are you sure that it's the best one? Because you have, Chinese, Japanese, and target languages, German and Italian. Are you sure it's working really well for all of those languages. We don't know. So as a salesperson, right, you kind of planting the seed of that's going to kind of grow into a tree of partnership, hopefully, right? But you're planting the seed of doubt, so to say, right, and start, kick off this thinking process. Telling the client that it's not that simple, right? And then they say, all right, what should we do? And our value at this point is pretty much testing all the engines that we have. We currently have, I think, 14 engines in our store that we work with. Testing those engines based on their content, right? Pre-translating with those engines, having automatic reviews, and then having people actually score the output based on their samples, right? And we can run this test across different content buckets. For example, they have their websites, web content, they have their UI, mobile UI, maybe they have their documentation and so on. So these are very different types of content, and some engines will perform differently on these types of content. So basically, we end up testing, running quite a lot of tests using different engines for each content type, for each language pair, which is quite a lot of work, to be honest. And then our linguists review and score the output to identify or to advise on the best setup. For example, for Spanish, you need OpenAI. For Chinese, you need DeepSeek. For this kind of content, you can get away with very light post editing. And for this kind of content, you probably want to have human post editing this happens with UI, because the cost savings are going to be negligible, but the quality risks are going to be significant, right? And in the end of the day, the sales person's goal is to build this project profile, right? Is to build this proposal that is going to help the client to cut the costs, to get the best cost at the highest level of quality. And it's usually a mix of different ingredients, different service levels, different workflows, and so on.
So basically, back to your consulting phase.
Exactly.
When that conversation comes up. So you throw in consulting. Now, when it comes to consulting, Ilya, like a lot of consulting firms, they charge for that. As we reimagine here the industry, and the industry is as a fork in the road, as you can imagine, and you're probably having those conversations now. The industry is at I think it's identity crisis almost, to figure out what do we want to be when we grow up. And I use that as a joke, but the idea is, where do we want to go as an industry from here? Where do we go from here? And the conversation around consultancy is a pretty interesting one, because now, do you offer the consulting as a part of the service, or do you charge for it separately? I guess that would be the model, I guess, if you're a consultant.
It depends. It's the MBA answer, right? It depends. So it depends on the relationship that you see that you can build. It depends on the project, depends on the size of the project. For mid to large size projects, we usually don't even charge for this consultancy, right? We either only charge still by the word sometimes, or by the hour for the actual volume translator, right? Sometimes we did have some projects where clients don't need the linguistic part. They just want everything set up. They just want to have this test, and we just charge them for the test. That would be the consultancy kind of part of things, right? So project based still. So yeah, it depends. It's I like how you put it, the identity crisis. So we're kind of shifting, or the industry is kind of shifting from per word rates to whatever everyone is trying to invent, maybe per hour, per batch, per project. Yeah. So yes, there's this kind of crisis. However, to be honest with you, most of the clients that we work with, they're more conservative than you would think. They still think in terms of volume of content multiplied by the number of languages, and that would be words, pretty much, per word rates.
Yeah, because we're still going back to the unit price, which is the per word rate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, has the AI or has technology today changed the profile of the customers that you are dealing with? Do you notice that there may be a brand new type of customers, type of requests, not necessarily companies as a customer, but maybe the type of content has shifted. Maybe the way they request translation has shifted. Do you have like new customers that they have different profiles, or maybe different departments giving you different things because of the technology?
Two things I'm seeing. First of all, the quality of inbound requests is much better for us, right? Suddenly, and it's probably logical, but the kind of clients that value what we do are the clients that are at a certain level. maybe localization maturity level, right? They have more content, they have more stakeholders in their localization pipeline. They have more teams involved in content creation, distribution, localization, and so on. And that's why it becomes more complex for them, right? Compared to maybe an indie developer that we used to work with like 3-5 years ago that just needs an app localized. Of course, the latter would be the best fit for AI right now, right? So yeah, the quality and the size of the deals has changed, right? And I welcome this change, right? The other thing that we are obviously noticing is that a lot of clients are building in-house expertise, and that's also absolutely fine. So, and they can use the vendor as let's say as a layer, as an interface, right? As a layer, as a microservice, if you wish, just to have the human in the loop, just to have the periodic QA, to have the linguistic QA parts of the sales or of the localization cycle, just to have this ad hoc consultancy. For example, if you've set up the process with a bunch of AI engines, you're happy with it today. Tomorrow, ChatGPT, Anthropic, and Gemini and Google will release new versions of those LLMs, right? And nobody knows how they're going to perform. So you need another run of this kind of evaluation, right, or testing. And this is where we can help, obviously. So yeah, interesting times, very challenging, very demanding, but still.
Yeah, I used the term yesterday. I was on a different podcast and I was recording one, and I said, that entire technology discussion, people tell me, it's just, maybe, the model didn't work or the technology didn't work. I said, whatever adjective you want to throw at a technology today, I think you have a milk carton in your fridge has a longer expiry date than any technology conversation that we're having right now.
Yeah.
Every morning I open I use Claude and Anthropic in general for many things, but every morning I open it, there's actually a new model update. Not every morning, but every couple of days there's a new model update. So that means the capabilities are changing, and this goes away from the traditional technology that you and I probably grew up looking at or experimenting with or experiencing, where you had to wait a year or two to get a new feature. Windows 11 shows up, then you have to wait 2-3 years for Windows 12, etc. So whatever software you're using, releases were not happening on a single minute. They were happening at a wide distance of time interval. Today, it is much easier, much faster for these software to get updated, and we get the benefit of them immediately. And the models gets updated immediately, and the results gets updated immediately. So yeah, I mean, once somebody said to me, hey, AI is like a drunken uncle at a wedding. You've got lots of BS, but you got some wisdoms out of it. I said, Absolutely. Well, hang on a second now. That's it has an expiry date, and that will change.
Absolutely, but what we also need to understand is that everything is happening. The development is happening really fast. However, I mean, a lot of people I don't know, maybe you and me, that are following closely the trends in localization, for example, are sort of living in a bubble, because outside of the bubble, there's still the majority of people, they don't do that, really. They still use neural machine translations, right? That's not LLMs, right? They're still more conservative. They don't have the time or capacity to follow that. And this is even more reason to involve somebody who knows what localization is, what's the best setup, what's the best.
Now, you and I've seen this before, right? So you mean you've seen this movie played out, and most people in the localization industry, they say, "Oh, I played this movie before." TM was supposed to change everything, then MT came along, and they say, "Okay, we're going to change everything now." And now Gen AI. So, and I've interviewed the head of, the chief engineer, I guess, for Google Translate on the channel, Hughes McDuff, and sort of like walked me through the tech that they use from how they built it to where it is right now. He retired now. And the question is that everybody is asking, this too shall pass. I've heard this many times. We are going to, see this again, move on, and, the old classic way of doing things will continue. I highly doubt that. This is completely different. I don't know. I had a conversation earlier just before this call, and I was having a conversation as, would we ever, this entire TMS still a valid proposition nowadays? If I can go in and build my own software. I mean, if you talk to anybody who is in the SaaS world, they're worried about Gen AI because code can be built now quite easily. And a customer does not need to buy 1,000 features. They can build one feature in one software overnight. What's your take on all this?
As someone who is also I run my side project, right, which is a SaaS. And first, the MVP was vibe coding, right? Obviously, as we all do. but then, as it starts to kind of evolve, as you see some, other people using it, what people don't really realize that somebody has to maintain this, right? And if you give birth to a bunch of internal projects inside the company, right, you're kind of becoming responsible for them. So we always responsible for those who we have adopted, right? So those are your projects now. And the question is, do you want to do this, or or is your role something different, right? Because I spent quite a lot of time maintaining the project I've created, and it's becoming a problem. It's becoming a business, pretty much a side business. It's becoming of course, not full time, but still, it consumes
You
quite a
refer
lot
to Humming
of
Deck,
resource.
right?
Yeah, I refer to Humming Deck. It's a sales enablement tool that I built for my team internal, in the first place, because we wanted to replace another tool we were using at the time. They liked it. I thought, why shouldn't I put it out there in the market? So I created a SaaS out of it, and it's kind of, I like how it's going. But again, if it's absolutely fine to do that, but you need to understand, you need to realize that you will need to maintain this. And if you have to maintain 2-3 products, internal products, right, you start to be responsible.
Yeah, because most of these things, including AI, including whatever technology you do, I mean, it almost needs, it cannot be one and done. You have to actually continue tweaking it, whatever you choose to do, whatever tech foundation you want to use for the future. If you're using AI, you're using TMS, whatever. Even TMS, you need to continuously update the memories. You need to update your style guides, etc. And even if you use AI, you cannot just put AI and walk away. It's never walk away, because you always need to be involved in continue updating, tweaking, etc.
Absolutely.
But we do have the sense in this industry, I want to build, and it's sort of like we want to build the railway and we want to put the trains on the railway, and then we forget about it. The train runs on time, everything goes well, but that's not real life. I mean, we've seen it many, many times in this industry. People try to build things in a fixed manner. That's why processes are so hard coded in any company, and try to move the process. It's a nightmare.
Let's take this, the sales perspective, right? Let's say you and I, we sell, I don't know, machinery. If you sell machinery, would you build your own in-house CRM system? Would you do that? Probably, yes. But would it be efficient, right? With all the security updates, it's not core to your business, but it's going to consume quite a lot of somebody's time to maintain this, right? So does it make sense? So the truth is somewhere in the middle. Some tools will be created internally. Some tools will still be SaaS.
No, for yourself, which market are you most interested in operating in or selling to? I would say, where's your customers based?
Our customers are actually SaaS for the most part. Game dev is also a big chunk of our business, but it's like it's very different, right? But mostly it's SaaS, mobile. So people who are quite tech aware, I would say. Quite advanced. Yeah, people who can actually build internal tools. And these are the kind of businesses that can build internal tools, including local.
Yeah, because there are developers, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's the good fit for them. Yeah, but other than that, any even classic business that produces a lot of content and sells internationally or globally is also our target.
Now, we've seen this in the localization industry before, but I'm interested in your take on it, because a lot of times people would say, okay, well, I won the customer. Good for you. You signed the contract, you cracked the champagne bottle open, everybody got their commission on the contract signing, off you go. But how do you retain that customer? Because there is this thing in the industry, you are as good as the last project you did. And it's valid. Because if your customer are not happy with the outcome of any project, it doesn't matter how small that transaction is, it could reflect negatively on the relationship. And I know you've done the account management, but account management is one thing, but you still have to be cautious of the final product, which is made by your service delivery team. Like the account manager can cover some of that. They can have conversation with the customer, understand what went wrong, and probably put some safety nets in place to prevent it from happening again. What is the overall retention strategy for you?
And well, I think here retention strategy is mostly the customer success role. And customer success, interestingly enough, also appeared at Alconost together with the account management team, but it's under the roof of operations, so under our COO. It's also a separate role, closer to production. And yeah, they're doing quite a lot. They're doing a great job, and their, let's say, objective is to identify or raise the risk flags before bad things happen. So they identify potential failures or potential quality issues before they are even getting surfaced by the client. So yeah, I think prevention is the right word here. Prevention, and then as a result, retention.
Now, from the revenue projection, what do you think 2026 look like for you? And is it going well? Do you see a market that is uh, upticking, or do you see it flat? How do you see the market right now?
I would say that it's more likely to be flat, right? For us to, I mean, we're not dying, but we're not growing as fast as we used to grow, right? So we're growing equality in terms of quality of our portfolio, in terms of retention and relationships, but not in volumes, obviously, because a significant chunk of the revenue is getting washed out by those who switch to in-house AI, pure AI, and so on. However, compared to traditional translation agencies, I would imagine we're doing better, right? So obviously the industry is getting reshaped right now. So yeah.
Now, from your perspective, and I know you've done this conversation with me and other people before on the podcast. Do you use podcast for your outreach for marketing purpose, or how do you use podcasting?
I use it as a recreation. I like doing it. I don't use it. Our marketing team is trying to use it. Right? Our CEO was on a couple of podcasts. Still not sure about ROI, to be honest with you. I think it's more about brand and expertise, communication than pure, month to month ROI, and efficiency and so on. So I like to talk to people. I like to get to know new people. Hopefully, we're putting word out there in the market about Alconost, about what's going on in localization, and it's interesting.
Yeah, but for the audience, if you are interested after this conversation of getting in touch with Ilya, please look him up on LinkedIn. I'll throw all that information inside of the descriptions when we post this episode. But in the meantime, if you are interested in getting hold of Ilya and you can't, just reach out to me. I'll facilitate an introduction. No problem. That's what I'm here for. And Ilya, like for me, as you know, is there anything else for the audience to know about Alconost that we have not really addressed? Now, I know you guys do. I love the idea of starting with a consulting, discussion with your customers. Basically, as I posted the last episode, is listening to the conversation versus with the customer versus, here's our widgets, here's our brochure. You're actually listening to the customer through the consultation discussion, and it's a consultative selling. This is what this is about in our industry. It was never about and I interviewed this client on my podcast. She told me, said, if I see one more RFP that says we have translators, in country translators, she said, everybody does. Why are you telling me this? I'm looking for something a little different.
Yeah,
And I love the consultative approach that you guys are pushing. That's good.
thanks.
So yeah, if I haven't covered anything, or you like to add anything that I haven't covered, please let me know here.
Yeah, I mean, the industry is changing. I think we shouldn't be afraid of change, right? And the clients, the business shouldn't be afraid of changes. I like this philosophical phrase that I try to use everywhere, is that if you want to make the kind of money you never made, you need to start doing things that you never done before. And you can apply that to sales, you can apply that to localization, you can apply that to life.
And if you had to leave the audience today, Ilya, or the localization professionals or whoever they are, global business leaders that they're listening to this channel, with one thing of this conversation to take away, what would that be? Do you know?
Localization, don't be afraid of localization. Localization is the competitive advantage. You need to use it wisely. It doesn't have to cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can start small. You can see if it's within your ROI expectations. And yeah, I would say that any business would, as our CEO puts it, right? Any business needs localization. The question is when.
The question is when, yeah. And we've talked about this before. You can, and I've talked to customers before where actually you just reminded me of it. A big manufacturing company here in Canada. I was asking them, hey, I noticed on your website, for instance, you sell to like pretty much every country around the world, but your website is in English. Is there a reason for that? They said, oh, everybody speaks English. I said, oh, you think so? and they sort of laughed and said, "Oh, not necessarily, but they understand it." And this is the, why do I need to bother kind of thing comes into play. It's a longer discussion about
It's a
this one, but
discussion, yeah, about
yeah, but
educating the client in the first place.
that's right. We have to do a lot more education, and this is what this podcast is about: is educating clients as much as educating. It's actually more because most of the viewers for this podcast is from outside the industry. I do have a lot of people from the industry listening to it, but to be honest with you, there are many voices now in the industry talking about the industry. But they're coming into the talk about it from the actual mechanics of how the industry work, and the outside people don't want to, the outside customers not necessarily interested how a TMS would work. Some would, but the general public, they're more interested in how do I get my content into the right market, in the right voice, in the right tone, etc. That's where I come in, and it feels like this conversation is going to land very well with those audience.
That's the right perspective. Yeah.
No, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I really liked it, and thanks for coming back and giving me the time on this one.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Anything else you'd like to add before I wrap it up?
I think we covered pretty much everything. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. And if you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for watching us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on the podcast channels, thank you for listening in. And also, I want to remind everybody that we do have an app now. It's app.l10nfiresidechat.com, where you can find all the content right on your mobile phone, or you can access it through your browser. But all the content is in one place: video, audio, blogs, you name it. It's all there. It's searchable. There's a library. You can search all that stuff. So I want to thank you all for listening in to this conversation, and I'll see you at the next episode. Thank you, Ilya. Appreciate it.